Good afternoon. My name is Feleceia Wilson. Thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this event today. I am so grateful to be among like-minded people who have similar experiences that I have had, and it is for that reason that I think I can start with this phrase, and I think you'll know what I'm talking about. You are not normal. As a parent of a child with a disability, you are not living under normal conditions. You are less than 10% of the population of parents in America, which means that by default, the way that most parents live their lives is very different than the way that you live yours. I consume a lot of information. We all do. I love self-help, self-care content, and I probably consume more of it than I actually try to do. I've recently been racking my brain trying to figure out why the things that I see on social media or on television or at church or in my mom groups don't seem to really fit my life. I've tried making all the adjustments to my schedule, my mindset, learning all the hacks, buying all the shortcuts, and none of that has really worked. It wasn't until that I was working on this keynote that I realized this very simple fact. My life looks different than those self-help gurus that I follow. Moms and dads like me have a hard time with self-care. And it's not because we don't want to care for ourselves. It's just that our lives are so different. Can you empathize with that statement? We think about things differently. We prioritize in different ways. We deal with different challenges. We wake up at different times. Our experience is different, and it is so important to remember that. Now, when you saw the title of my keynote today, Put Your Mask On First, taking care of yourself for the sake of your child, you might have thought that I was going to talk about self-care in the form of health in your body. That's really important, but that is not the point of our chat today. I was invited here because of my little girl, Zoe. She was born with Down syndrome and no fingers on one of her hands. Maybe, like some of you, you found out the way that I did. I didn't know that she was going to be born the way that she was until the day that she got here. They'll grow, I remember saying to my doctor under intense anesthesia. Don't worry, her fingers will grow. That was my response to the doctors on the day that Zoe was born, when they told me that she had no digits on one of her hands. When they told me that it looks like she might have Down syndrome. Digits, what a funny word. Why did they use that word? That's the time that they brought me all the forms and asked me to make decisions for which I had very little context. That's the day that, unbeknownst to me, my new identity would flip on like a light switch. Retrospect is so dang 2020, y'all. When I got home from the hospital, my child was still in the NICU. My dad had dropped me off at home. No one was there. I don't know if I'd ever felt so alone. I sat on my bed in our room, looking at an empty crib, and I cried uncontrollably. I didn't know why at the time, but I think I know now. All of the emotions that I had, they just came bubbling up and out, and I couldn't stop them. I called my dad because for whatever reason, he was the only person answering his phone at the time. He came back to my house and he hugged me for what seemed like an eternity. Me and Zoe have been rocking together since 2009. A few apartments, a husband, and a baby brother later. We're still trying to figure out who we are together and apart. I wrapped a lot of my identity in Zoe for many years. I felt like I had to. We have to do that, right? If we don't advocate for our children as their parents, who else will do it? But maybe the hardest thing for us to do is advocate for ourselves. I finally found myself a doctor. After years of having and recovering from making babies and taking Zoe to the doctor, I finally went and found one for myself, and the doctor checked out other things on me other than making babies and my baby parts. Going to the doctor felt so weird. First of all, there was no small human with me, and my husband wasn't there to make sure that I made it up the elevator and to my destination safely. Now, even though we had Ellington, our almost 2-year-old son, during the pandemic, Frankie, my husband, went with me to almost every appointment. This was one of the few times that I've gone to the doctor solo dolo. And y'all, I was lost. I mean, not actually lost. I found my way there just fine, but I stumbled over my words. I couldn't articulate my own problems, the problems that I feel in my own body every day. My niece, who I talked to the day before my doctor's appointment, had emailed me this fantastic list of things that I wanted to talk about at the doctor's office. But I felt so embarrassed bringing them up when I got there. I was literally at a loss for words. This is all so different than the way that I try to care for Zoe. I know all of Zoe's business. With her, I try to be a few steps ahead. She doesn't always tell me what's going on, so I end up having to pay a lot of attention to her. I can tell you about her bumps, her bruises, her moles. I can tell you about how to remove crusty earwax from her ears, how to care for her rough elbow spots. I can tell you about how she's right-hand dominant but doesn't have any fingers over there, so she compensates and she does it quite well. I can tell you how she's congested and when she's congested in her chest or her nose. I can tell you when her teeth hurt or when she's lying about taking a shower. And I can tell you when she doesn't feel well, but she doesn't want to tell me. I can tell you about how her left eye drains some. It's a little squinty, just like mine. And I can tell you about how many times she's had ear tubes and pneumonia. I can tell you about that time that she went to an ER that we'll never go back to when she was 3 years old because they scared her so badly. I can tell you all of this and more about my daughter. But when it came time for me to tell my doctor about my right ear pain, that pain that I have felt for months, I couldn't find the words. I even felt ashamed trying to share some of the experiences that I have in my body. And I even felt a little guilt when it was time to pay that little $35 copay. Zoe needs less care than other kids with disabilities. I recognize that. And I even recognize the privilege that exists in just talking about problems that many people might consider to be minor. We have insurance. We have jobs. I have a husband and a beautiful family and a support system. I have so many things. And yet, in every phase of my evolution as Zoe's mama, and now the mama of Zoe and Ellington, and the wife of Frankie, and the leader at my job, it's all very different. And it's still pretty hard. I didn't always have these things. As a matter of fact, when I first got this invitation, I was a little triggered. Now, triggered is an intense word, I know, but I was worried that I was being invited to talk about a version of myself that I'd done some work to put to rest. That self-employed, kind of desperate to survive, make a name for herself, single mom, was an internal persona that drove me to provide. The only thing I knew to do was to become the version of myself that I thought I needed to be. Zoe's mom, unashamed of a diagnosis, unafraid to do the things that, in retrospect, were kind of desperate. Now, none of them were unhealthy, but I was just trying, really, really, really trying hard, perhaps to the detriment of my own personal identity. There was a period of time, about a decade ago, when I couldn't find a job. I'd searched for several months, and application after application, phone call after phone call, I was straight up rejected. It makes me a little uncomfortable to even say this story out loud anymore. I don't like telling it. At some point, I'd made the decision to start peeling back the somewhat calloused layers of this found existence. To be quite honest, I'm still peeling. Zoe was about 2 years old when I started a strategic communications company that's got her name tacked to the front of it, the Zoe Communications Agency. At the beginning, I was just doing graphic design because that's what I knew how to do, and the kid had to eat. So since no one would give me a job, I just made one up. They apparently call that entrepreneurship now, that's trendy thing that's going on, but I fell into it by accident. I liked being a graphic designer well enough, but I just couldn't help but to ask the question, does this design work? If the people see this on a postcard or a billboard or the book of faces, will they do what we're asking them to do? Now, this was ahead of the time that social media strategists and TikToks and Reels were really popular. But asking those questions were the beginning of me finding a new version of myself. Now, I am what they call a brand strategist. This kind of work has existed for a long time. I just didn't know that it did. People have been planning what organizations and brands say for forever, asking questions, doing research, evaluating perception, measuring results. It's yummy and curious, and I love this work that I do, that I have had the opportunity to do for the past several years. But this is the work that I never would have found had I not learned to love asking questions. So, side note, let your kids ask questions. I've got curious kids, you should let them ask questions. Building a brand strategy can be scary work. You usually begin with a big blank canvas of nothing, and then you toss some questions on that blank canvas, and you start looking for answers. You do focus groups, and you conduct surveys. You dig into stats. Heck, you even Google, and you partake in a good scroll in the comments section. And do you know what usually comes from all of that work? Well, not answers. You usually come out with more questions. But the process, what you end up doing is making discoveries, beautiful, insightful discoveries. Brand strategy is about unearthing little gems of truth that live beneath the surface of curiosity. Now, truth is important. Good branding should never be based on lies or ambiguity. Good, integral strategic communications means that we're digging deep. We are asking tough questions and finding truth. On occasion, we discover a truth that's hard to swallow. Those are okay, and they're necessary too. My hard truths live at home with me. Their names are Zoe and Ellington. The hard truth about Zoe is that she was born with Down syndrome and no fingers on one of her hands. She's beautiful, and I wouldn't trade her or my experience as her mother for all of the dollars in the universe. If I didn't have her, what good would those dollars be? Down syndrome doesn't make her less of a person. But Down syndrome has impacted our lives. And it also has impacted the way that we do life. And her beautiful baby brother Ellington, who came along when Zoe was 12 years old, years after she and I had found a rhythm and a way of doing life, well, he kind of upended all of that. His existence meant that we needed to start all over again. The truth can be hard and beautiful all at the same time. There's a truth that probably all of us can agree upon if we're in this room today. I read this statistic that said that parents of people with disabilities have a lower quality of life than parents of neurotypical children. At first, I scoffed. My life is filled with more joy than I have the words to articulate. I like to play with my kids and touch them and smell them and eat them and talk to them and dance with them. My tribe is the very best gift I have ever been given. But then I thought about the practical stuff. My new doctor asked me if I exercised. I haven't figured out how to get that back into my life, I told her. And it's true. Every day feels like we're one more step to consistency. But if I were to be quite honest, my life is nothing like consistent right now. Every day is different, and every moment is filled with a something. Even sitting and sleeping are forced, scheduled activities. Many of the practical things in our lives are built around what serves our children, neurodiverse or otherwise. But man, if it doesn't feel like the stakes are even higher when our kids are just a little bit different than everyone else. What are we supposed to do about this? You're probably thinking, I thought this talk was going to be about how I'm supposed to put my mask on first and maintain myself and my identity and my peace for the betterment of my children. Well, it is. Well, you're getting to that part. But first things first. There's a lot of ground that we've got to lay before we can get into the work. Since my job is made up of asking questions, I'm going to show you how I would approach this like I do in my everyday work, by asking good questions. Remember, though, good questions might tend to lead to more questions. Those questions are going to help us to discover and unearth the little gems that are going to get us to our next steps. And those steps help us to make decisions about what should come next. If I were to just give you a list of things to do, I'd be just like the self-help gurus on social media that have no context for your real life. So I don't believe in giving my clients the answers to the questions. My job is to be their guide as they try to find their way. So that's what we're going to do right now. These questions are good for parents, caretakers, really anybody. So I want you to grab a pen and paper, and I want you to jot these questions down. You can even start thinking through some of your responses to the questions as your answers come to mind. Since many of us here are motivated by the well-being of our children, I'm going to frame these questions with both you and them in mind. Are you ready? Here we go. Here's the first question. When you look at your children, what parts of you do you see that you love? When you look at your children, what parts of you do you see that you love? My parents used to tell me that children are a reflection of their parents. I later grew up to learn that they were right. There's a lot of science to back how a child's environment shapes their behavior, and parents help to shape the way that their children see the world. But kids also have this mysterious way of showing you you. They show you the not so awesome things, and they show you the good things too. I think many of us get distracted overwhelmingly by either the good of ourselves that we see in our kids or the opposite. We obsess about what they do or not do, and we blame ourselves. Or we see the beautiful things that they do that remind us of ourselves. Children are the best mirrors. Zoe is my beautiful, loud, theatrical girl. She's kind to pretty much everyone and she never met a meal she didn't like. She'll also binge watch 15 shows in a row if you let her, and she'll obsess about old things to the point of being afraid to try new things. She is incredibly independent. She doesn't need friends, but she'd rather life with them than without them. Running might just be the bane of her existence, but she's cute and she knows it. She's the best of me, and she's the stuff that I need to work on too. My guy Ellington, he is one spicy guy. He prefers vegetables over pork, but he would prefer a bowl of sugar, and he can keep up with the best of them. He's got the juiciest thighs and the happiest smile. He'd rather a snuggle than to sleep alone. I think he gets that from his sister. And for some reason, it feels really good for him to frown. I thought he started frowning after watching Rita Repulsa on the Power Rangers. And then one day, I found myself doing a little fussing at him, and I felt my eyebrows furrow. He furrowed his eyebrows too. I immediately changed my face, and he changed his too. Ellington is vibrant. He can't help himself. He helps me to remember that there's a part of me that's vibrant too. Now, what about you? When you look at your children, what parts of you do you see that you love? Here's the next question to think about. What version of you do you want your children to remember? I often think about my kids when they're in their 30s. Not their teens because they're too spicy, and not their 20s because they still have a lot of things to figure out. But in their 30s, some things are starting to come together. They are putting some pieces together and starting to think about how their childhood affected them. What's the story that you want your children to tell themselves about you? What do you want them to tell their friends, their therapists, their spouses, their community? Who were you to them while they were growing up? How was their world? And what do they remember of you? So, what is the vision of you that you want your children to remember? Now, you might have figured out by now that this is no 12-step program. I am not going to tell you how to answer these questions. This is your journey, and you'll have to find those answers for yourself. But good answers start with good questions, and that's what I'm here for. So, question number 3. If you are a friend or a caregiver, how can you be present often? Parents of children with disabilities don't just need the occasional help. They need the almost every day of the week help. If you want to be a part of their community, be present often, not just every once in a while. Zoe is what you would call nonverbal. She's got a high level of comprehension, but her use of language is a little unconventional. The people who understand her are the ones who spend the most time with her. Now, occasional help is awesome. It is great. We appreciate it. But consistent help is even better. Find one way you can contribute to the lives of your friends on a consistent basis and stick to that thing. Will you volunteer to keep the kids once a month? Do after-school pickup on Thursdays? Uber takeout every other Saturday? Send $50 a month toward lunch or school supplies or medicine? Choose your level of commitment and stick to that thing. When I tell you a little goes such a long way, I mean it. In the words of our friends from Hamilton, that is one less thing to worry about. So ask for permission to build presence into the lives of the people that you love, and don't make them figure out how. And now, what kind of help do I need? What kind of help do I need? Sometimes I wish that I could eliminate the words "I'm fine" from our vocabulary. It's okay not to be fine. It's really okay to say, "I'm not fine." Being better for our kids means that we can't carry the burden of all of this alone, because we have to take care of ourselves too. Finding time to exercise, that matters. My doctor said so. I believe it. It's true. Getting your hair done and being brave enough to look in the mirror and to see what you like, that matters too. Our children pick up on our furrowed brows and our buried identities. They conform to tiny versions of us. We can pass down health to our kids, but we might just need a little help to do that. I am on a quest to figure out how to move my body consistently, again, because I just refused to have my doctor ask me if I'm exercising the next time I go. Now, I don't know if that means that I'm going to be on a standing treadmill under my desk or hiring a personal trainer, but I'm going to ask you right now that if you've got any ideas about how the busy mom of Zoe and Ellington can find movement in her day without being bombarded by littles or without having to wake up at 4 a.m., I would love to hear it. I am learning to understand that sometimes I need help. And I also have to understand how to articulate the help that I need. It's not easy, but I think my whole family will be better for it. And that's it, really. That's really the goal. How can I be better for my whole family and for myself too? Your life, my dear friend, is not normal, and that is okay. You have got variables that didn't exist before, variables that might not look like those of your friends and your families. And through it all, through asking questions, you will evolve to be a better version of yourself. One question at a time, you will unearth your way to a better version of you for the ones you love the most. Thank you for coming to my Mom Talk.